Hey, it's Danny from ProjectManaverse.com, and in this video I'm going to share common risks and issues management mistakes that us project managers often make. So let's jump in. So first of all, let me say that change is actually a risky business. That's the nature of the game. But the advantage of managing change through a project is that we have a structure for managing the risks and identifying them. So it does take the risk away by having the project deliver the change in the first place. Now, risk is basically anything that could go wrong on your project, and if that thing actually happens and the risk occurs, that risk becomes an issue and you have to mitigate or close down that issue. Otherwise, it's going to impact your project in some way, either the timelines or the cost or the quality. Usually those are the three big ones, and you should care about proper risks and issues management as a project manager, because risks and issues management has the power to make or break your project. If you're very good at anticipating and managing risk, then it's going to make your life so much easier. You're not going to be running around firefighting your issues all the time. That's not where you want to be as a project manager. You want things to go nice and smoothly, and if there's something's going to go wrong, you want to know about it way in advance, and you're already planning about what you can do about it or trying to stop it from happening. Okay, so with that being said, let me go on to the common mistakes. So number one is project managers don't identify the risks in the first place. We don't spend enough time identifying them, being proactive and really thinking about it. And you can do that at the start of the project, not right at the start, but once you've got going a little bit. You can either have every 2 weeks a little bit of a brainstorming session, but at least one session at the start to think about those key risks that could happen on your project, and try not to make them too generic, the ones that can happen on every project. Try and keep it specific to your circumstance and the unique set of circumstances of your project. So be proactive about identifying those risks. And a way you can do that is not just by brainstorming risks specifically, but make sure you're being thorough with your stakeholder management. So things like sharing your plan, things like sharing your design documents and your outcomes of your project, and doing regular communications, because all that socialization of key documents and communications to the wider stakeholders, it will identify issues and risks. But people out there in the business will say, well, hold on, that's going to impact me. What are you going to do about this? Or have you thought about that? You need that wider perspective. Don't try and do it all yourself. If you're not doing that socialization, then you're at risk of not identifying the risks, if that makes sense. So that's tip number one, or mistake number one. People don't spend enough time trying to identify the risks in the first place. Number two is that project managers don't manage the risk properly. We tend to monitor the risk. So I see this time and time again. You'll have a risk log and you'll capture some risks in there. Then it's just like a tick box exercise. Say, yeah, I've updated my risks. I've updated the commentary every couple of weeks. But we don't actually try and proactively manage the risks and stop them from happening. Try and get really creative with your team. Think, right, guys, we need to try and stop this risk from happening. If we have to stop it from happening, how could we do it? And try and get them to be creative and think of how you could do that. There's usually some things you can do to actually stop them from happening in the first place. At the very least, you want to be managing the impact of the risk if they do happen. So if the risk does occur, you want to have a plan of action to mitigate that impact as much as possible, to reduce the impact so it doesn't derail your project. So have an action plan. It's like, okay, the risk has happened, the worst has happened, but we know exactly what to do, so let's crack on. You're not running around thinking, oh God, what do we do now? What do we do now? You've got a plan, you're ready, you're prepared, and you can take action. So that's common mistake number two. Common mistake number three is that we don't describe the risks very well when we're writing them. And that's quite important I'll tell you why in a second, but when you're writing your risks, you want to write it in a way that anyone could really understand it. So don't speak in jargon. Don't make it the language very specific to your kind of project. Try and imagine that someone just out in the business could just pick up that risk and get the sense of what it means. So don't keep it quite high level, and always say what the risk is. So start this description by saying there is a risk that, and then say what the risk is. Then you can go on to describe what the impact of that risk would be. So there's a risk that this could happen, and that means the impact is this, and that ultimately puts our timelines at risk, or whatever it is. But make sure you're describing the risk clearly. And I say that because, number one, if you don't do that, it can cause confusion, and it can do you a disservice, because if someone understands the risk in the business or at a senior level and they really get it, they can say, well, I can help with that, I get that, you can just do this. If they don't really understand it, they're not going to pay too much attention to it, or they're going to ask for it to be clarified, and you don't want to look bad in that sense because you're not doing your admin properly. Also, your project management office, the kind of central team that does all the project governance and documentation, maintenance and all that kind of stuff, they're usually quite hot on risk and the description of them, and they want it done like very well. They want it very well written. So you don't want to be hassled by your PMO every week to say, can you update this risk? Just get it right in the first place so they won't bother you. Okay, number 4 is we don't learn from other projects. I don't know why, but as project managers, we've got a wealth of information at our fingertips in terms of post-implementation reviews and lessons learned, but also risks and issues logs and project plans. But if you know that you're doing a project and there have been similar projects in the past in your company, just have a look at their documentation, look at their risks and issues log and see what kind of risks and issues they had, and think, right, they had all these issues, let's not let that happen on our project, and we'll try and mitigate them and anticipate them. Similar projects are going to have similar risks and issues. Not exactly the same, they're never exactly the same, but they can be quite similar. So you can anticipate risks on your project by looking at previous projects and looking at their risks and issues logs. Okay, that's the video. I'm going to do a quick recap and then we'll call it a day. So what are the common mistakes when it comes to managing risks and issues? Number 1 is the risks aren't identified at the start. You're not spending enough time proactively trying to identify what the risks are, either by not spending the time doing it or not communicating enough on your project and socializing your key documents like your project plan, your design document, and your go live dates, and your just general comms in terms of what you're doing. Mistake number 2 is that we don't manage the risks. We just tend to monitor them, but you want to manage your risk proactively. So really try to stop those risks from happening as best you can, and also try and mitigate the impact of the risks if they do actually occur and become issues. You want an action plan. If the thing goes wrong and actually happens, what are we going to do about it? Number 3 is we don't describe them well. So make them easy to understand and always start the sentence with, there is a risk that X ... And number 4, we don't learn from other projects. So if you're starting a new project, try and find similar projects, get your hands on their risks and issues log, find out what their issues were and learn from them. Okay, that's the video. I hope you enjoyed it. Give it a thumbs up if you did. If you want to see more videos like this one, hit that subscribe button. And until tomorrow, please take care.